Hello everyone and welcome to webinar on rehabilitation on pelvic floor dysfunction. My name is Deepak Shah. I'm your host for today and I'm the CEO of Biotech. Along with me on my panel, Mr. Rajiv Talati
and Dr. Mayank Thakkar, who has organized this webinar. So we welcome you all and thank you very much for participating in this webinar. Let me introduce you to our speaker for today. She is Dr. Bijal Dodia. She is an MPT, Cardiovascular and Respiratory Science. She is also certified pelvic floor therapist. She is a consultant physiotherapist at Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital and Research Center since 2014. She has successfully evaluated and treated various cases of pelvic floor dysfunction, including urinary and fecal incontinence, organ prolapse, dysgenic defection, and various gastrointestinal system anomalies in adult and pediatric population of both gender. She is mentored by Dr. Revika Das, an Australian physical therapist specializing in and practicing pelvic floor physical therapy. Thank you, Dr. Bijal, and you are welcome. You may please start the webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Deepak, for a warm welcome. I thank all the participants to join this webinar in a great numbers. So I'm very happy. Thank you so very much. I thank Biotech India, Mr. Rajiv Talati and Mr. Deepak Shah for organizing this webinar. And as their tagline says, focused, fast and first. Focus, definitely, they're definitely focused in the rehabilitation. Fast, definitely one of the very fast and the first ones to pick up a rare topic called pelvic floor rehabilitation. So without wasting much time, I'm going to start over. Welcome you all again. So objectives of this webinar are, sorry for this. At the end of this, participants would be able to identify the muscles of the pelvic floor and list their functions, understand the musculoskeletal dysfunctions underlying incontinence and pelvic pain syndromes, and describe the components of comprehensive pelvic floor evaluation and management. Now, along with this, there are other objectives from my side are basically pelvic floor is something which is a very niche area and an unintentionally ignored area. Now, when it comes to telling the common people about awareness of pelvic floor, we have observed that many of our own colleagues, made from medical profession or be from rehab personnel, we are not very much aware about pelvic floor as such as an entity. Whenever a physiotherapist is been asked, okay, pelvic floor, so the first thing comes in our mind is Kegels. But through this webinar, I want the participants to know that it is just not Kegels, it's way beyond that. Because when a person or a patient comes to us with any kind of pelvic floor abnormality, it's an extremely important step to evaluate. First of all, take history in detail, evaluate the patient, categorize the patient, where the patient falls into which category, whether it is incontinence to one extreme or to a hypertonic pelvic floor to another extreme, or patient lies somewhere in between, or maybe he or she has some other problem. So we need to identify, and that identification is the key. Once we identify, then the treatment is definitely not a big task, because we are all physiotherapists and we have definitely learned a lot of techniques which we are using on other muscles. And like any other muscle, pelvic floor is also nothing but muscles. So if I can treat my trapezius, I can definitely treat puborectalis, right? So this is what is the objective. And also Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital and Department of Physical Therapy is definitely open to collaborate with different physiotherapists who are already doing great work in pelvic floor rehabilitation. And also we are happy to learn holding each other's hand. So please feel free to contact us even through biotech or whatever. So please let us know if you are interested in collaborating. So without wasting much time, let me come back to the topic. So the pelvic floor is nothing but a wide, thin muscular layer of tissue that forms the inferior border of the abdominopelvic cavity, which is your basically base of the core. It is a broad funnel-shaped sling of muscles and fascia extending from the symphysis pubis in front to the coccyx, which is behind, and from one lateral side wall to the other, which are the ala of pelvis. It definitely houses the organs like urinary bladder, urethra, vagina, uterus, prostate in men, and rectum, which are all definitely very vital organs for a normal bodily function. And yes, as I said, it is base of the core, and as I said earlier, an often neglected area. Forget the doctors also, the patients also tell, "Arey madam, it's okay, pelvic floor, urine pass, urine is passing, okay, it's okay, I will wear diapers." But no, how can I tell this to somebody that okay, I'm passing urine, or maybe I'm incontinent? So it is overall an often neglected area, be it a medical profession or be it a layman. So let's come to the brief anatomy of pelvic floor. So on your left, you are seeing a female pelvic floor, and on your right, there is male pelvic floor. So as far as the muscles are concerned, apart from a few muscles, there is not much difference. But yes, as far as the functions are, and yes, functions are also the same. Just a little bit of changes in the male pelvic system is the presence of testes and penis and muscles associated with that. Let's talk about parts of pelvis, basically starting from the strong bony pelvis, which is made up of ilium, ischium, pubis, sacrum behind, coccyx, and you can see a nice pubic symphysis in front, strong enough to support the pelvic floor structures and definitely flexible enough to support and accommodate a growing uterus. Let's talk about the muscles. So the pelvic floor is divided into three muscular layers: superficial, middle, and the deep one. Now the superficial muscles, as you all can see in the pointer, superficial muscles are made up of the urogenital, they are also called as urogenital diaphragm. Sorry. So it is made up of the urethral sphincter, the anal sphincter. It is called as, both are external urethral sphincter and external anal sphincter, is made up of ischiocavernosus muscle, which is over here. It's made up of bulbospongiosus muscle over here, and it's made up of superficial transversus perineae muscle, which is over here. So this is also called as urogenital triangle because it is in the shape of a triangle. So this forms a superficial layer. The middle layer is called as deep transversus perineae. So once we cut through, so the next comes is, after the superficial layer, is the deep transversus perineae muscle. Beyond this, inside, there is something called as levator ani, which we have heard quite a lot during our tenure. It's also called as pelvic diaphragm. It's made up of muscles like pubococcygeus, iliococcygeus, coccygeus, or also called as ischiococcygeus, and puborectalis. Well, puborectalis is seated behind, so definitely, sorry, not shown in the diagram, sorry. So these are the layers which I just spoke about. These are the muscles which I spoke about. The position and the knowledge of these muscles is something which is very important for a pelvic floor physical therapist. It's also houses ligaments, fascia, and it has got this, definitely like any other organ, it has got its own nerve supply. There are basically no classic ligaments like maybe medial collateral ligament of the knee or lateral collateral ligament of the knee. These are all basically thickenings of the retroperitoneal fascia, so which are strong enough but also flexible enough to accommodate changes happening in the pelvic floor. like in terms of, say, for example, prolapse or maybe a growing uterus. The fascia consists primarily of blood and lymphatic vessels and nerve and fatty connective tissue, and it's also named as endopelvic fascia, and this is the terminology which is mainly used by the surgeons. It is supplied by the S2 to 4 nerve roots directly from the efferent part, and anterior pelvis is being supplied by the pudendal nerve. So posteriorly by the S2 to 4 nerve roots, and anteriorly by the pudendal nerve. Now functions, so it's basically, it provides supports to the pelvic organs, voiding, defecation, sexual functions, specifically in males. It is associated with erectile dysfunction and ejaculation. In females, it voluntarily contracts, squeezes the pelvic floor, contributing to sexual sensation, basically orgasm and arousal. It supports the growing uterus in pregnancy, aids in birthing process, and is the base of the core. Now, let me just ask you one simple question before I go on to the further thing about, there's a small poll. I just want to know a little bit about what, how my intelligent participants know what about pelvic floor. Can we please have the first question of the poll, Mr. Deepak? Can you please have the question? All right, maybe that's okay. Let that be.
Yeah. In a minute, Bijal.
Okay,
In a
sorry.
minute. Yeah. The poll is on now.
So the question is, pelvic floor muscles are made up of, first is 70% fast twitch fibers and 30% slow twitch fibers, 70% slow twitch fibers and 30% fast twitch fibers, 50% fast twitch fibers and 50% slow twitch fibers, 60% fast twitch fibers and 40% slow twitch fibers. So you have 15 seconds. Can you please answer this?
Yes, people are still voting, so we'll wait for 4 more
Okay.
seconds.
Sure.
Okay, so in the poll, and this is the result.
That's amazing. So the correct answer is B. Yes, it is 70% slow twitch fibers and 30% fast twitch fibers. Great. So definitely my participants are super intelligent. Thank you. Thank you so much. So let's go on to the next part. So now let's talk about the pelvic floor dysfunctions. Now, when it comes to pelvic floor abnormality, the first thing comes in our mind is maybe incontinence or prolapse. So basically, it's just not limited to that. There are 4 types of pelvic floor dysfunctions. First is hypertonus, which is pain dysfunction, supportive dysfunction, which is associated with the weakness of the pelvic floor incoordination, and pelvic floor disuse. So these are the 4 types of pelvic floor dysfunctions. Let's first talk about hypertonus or pain dysfunctions. The reason why I took this as the first one to discuss is, definitely it is one of the very rare condition, not very rare nowadays. Definitely it's increasing compared to when it was in like 60s and 70s. It is definitely increasing now. And another thing is, when it comes to the treatment of chronic pelvic pain, yes, we are the leaders. We can definitely treat this entirety. So let's talk a little about chronic pelvic pain. As the name suggests, it is chronic and pelvic pain. It is basically an excruciating pain, and patient would complain nothing but just pain in the pelvic area, and frankly, people really wonder that, look, I cannot really relate to what he or she is talking about. And then, the patients are being directed to the psychiatrist and the psychologist that, look, you need some help. There is something definitely wrong with your brain, but definitely that's not the case. So let's take a little deeper dive into it. So this is the US data. 2 lakh women in the US have been diagnosed to have pelvic pain, which has got a great negative impact on their quality of life. Their persistent or recurrent pelvic pain associated with symptoms of lower urinary tract, sexual, bowel, or gynecological dysfunction. So the patient would also complain of, oh, I'm not able to pass urine, or maybe I'm constipated. So basically, we wonder with constipation along with pain. Oh, is it a GI issue? Oh no, doesn't look like. The gastroenterologist sends the patient directly to the psychiatrist. So it's basically ultimately all things come to the brain, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with the brain. Also, there are no proven infection or obvious pathology associated with it. The etiology is basically pelvic floor dysfunction, definitely in terms of musculoskeletal imbalances. There could be visceral or somatic disorder in terms of any kind of active inflammatory process which is going on. Trauma, something wrong happened in the childhood, some sexual abuse, or any kind of sexual insult which has happened in the childhood or any time during their lifetime, and which has created a very negative impact on their psyche and definitely injured or traumatized the pelvic floor. And yes, psychogenic, as I said, yes. See, now when it comes to psychogenic, it is not always 100% that yes, patient needs a psychiatrist. Look, I can't help. As a physiotherapist, it is our duty to actually look into the matter, what it is, and is it actually whether it is relating to the symptoms which are being spoken by the patient. So it's very important to correlate what the patient is saying, and yes, with our clinical examination. Symptoms is nothing but pain. Oh, doctor, I have got a lot of pain. What do? I can't sit. I can't walk for a longer time. I can't sleep. My sexual life is definitely at a jeopardy. My wife, I'm not able to keep up with the expectations of my wife or husband. So as soon as I try to defecate, I get a very strong pain, and I'm not able to defecate or urinate. So basically, this is also associated with some abnormality in the other musculoskeletal system. I'll talk about it a little in detail. So this also has primarily pain, but also associated with pain in the lumbar, perivaginal, perirectal, penile area, scrotum, abdomen, coccygeal pain, posterior, and also it can also go on to posterior or medial aspect of the thigh. There is definitely a burning sensation which may lead to thinking, okay, probably there is nerve entrapment. Yes, it could be. So penile, vulvar, or clitoral burning. There is constipation, dyspareunia, painful erection. There is definitely very uncomfortable voiding. So these are the symptoms of chronic pelvic pain. Now, the causes are multiple, frankly, but the primary thing I've just noted down, very primary and very easily seen and caught up causes. So first is the joint dysfunction. So any kind of joint dysfunction in any other area associated with pelvic floor, like lumbar, sacroiliac joint, coccyx, pubic symphysis. There are pelvic fractures, which definitely disturb the entire musculoskeletal system of the pelvic floor. Habitual postural dysfunction. Yes, postural dysfunctions are putting muscles or musculoskeletal system into the mechanical disadvantage, and yes, leading to pelvic pain. It is one of the very important contributory factor. Trauma due to childbirth, surgery, sexual abuse or trauma, pelvic disease, mainly pelvic inflammatory disease, or they say cystitis in males, or even prostatitis in males. Sorry, cystitis is also, it can happen in female both, and prostatitis specifically in males. Hemorrhoids or fissures, bladder disorders, and as I enumerated before, could be psychological. The primary cause is oh my God, angry muscles. So basically, these are the muscles which are angry in terms of they are spasmed, they are tight, and these are the muscles which can contribute to very bad pelvic pain. Is pelvic floor muscles definitely primarily. Associated muscles are piriformis, obturator internus, hip adductors. Also, it can go up to abdominal muscles, your gluteal region. So basically, all the muscles in and around the pelvic floor are can contribute to the pelvic floor pain. And I call them angry muscles, and my patients laugh at it. So now what to do as a physiotherapist? So very importantly is thorough history. We need to understand the onset and severity of symptoms, previous medical and surgical history, medications, what patient is taking now, history of psychological or social stressors. So we need to really dive very deep into a patient's psychological aspect, the social factors, what's happening in the family, the financial aspect and everything. So we need to really dive deep into it and check what could be the contributory factors. And this can also lead to, see, this pelvic pain evaluation is never complete in one day. It needs a subsequent session. And importantly, it for any pelvic floor patient, it is very important for us to develop a good rapport. Otherwise, the patient will not open up and will not be able to talk openly to us about their problems, including sexual problems, when it comes to specifically about the Indian scenario, wherein talking about pelvic floor or anything related to urine, stools, or sexual aspect is a topic of taboo. So we need to develop a good rapport with the patient so that he or she is free enough and comfortable enough to talk to us about their problems. Along with this, we need to also have a review with the family, whoever is there, so coming with the patient or staying with the patient, staying very closely with the patient. And we need to go a little deep into details of this. Systemic review of other systems, like how we do any other examination. So similarly, the same thing which we do. Now, when it comes to areas around the pelvic floor, so these are the musculoskeletal examination aspect which we see. Externally, we have a look at the gluteal complex, we check because they are the pelvic stabilizers and hip extensors. We check iliopsoas, piriformis for tightness, tenderness, and strength. It has been identified and found that these enumerated muscles, along with the abdominal, it is also found that there are trigger points in adductors and rectus abdominis muscle. Also, the obliqui of the abdominal area have got tenderness when it comes to pelvic floor. Also, we cannot overlook the muscles, the perivertebral muscles which are there around in the back. So we can definitely not overlook them, and we should definitely look into detail about the tightness and the tenderness and the strength. We need to do a detailed lumbopelvic exam like how we do in the routine musculoskeletal examination, detailed postural examination. So it has been found out that any kind of abnormality in terms of posture leading to any malalignment of the lumbopelvic region, which generally happens with any kind of postural abnormality, be it in the superior quadrant of the body or the lower quadrant of the body, it definitely makes a lot of changes in the lumbopelvic region. And it's very important for us to have a look into it. And because of the malalignment and being at a mechanical disadvantage, it impacts the pelvic floor muscles. As I spoke before, abdominal muscles for strength and tenderness, we do Faber test, we do Thomas's test, SLR, and functional squat. Basically, we rule out all the abnormalities of the hip and we find out which are the problematic areas in and around the pelvic floor. Now, coming to the pelvic floor examination. So there are basically two aspects. One is the external pelvic floor examination and second is the internal pelvic floor examination. External pelvic floor examination is mainly the observation. So we actually, I have shown the picture of female pelvic floor or female genitalia, but this also applies to the male genital organs as well. So we check for skin, We look at it for the color, the signs of infection or inflammation, any kind of redness, any kind of dryness in the vaginal area. In females, any kind of abnormal lumps which are being seen or felt, or any kind of fecal or urinary leakage or incontinence ongoing. Position of the perineum. So basically, we check where the perineum lies. Now, perineum is somewhere over here between the anus and the vaginal opening. This is the perineum. So this area is the perineum basically. So we check whether the perineum is very much is it been positioned in a different way. It is supposed to be in one line with vagina and anus. So we check whether it is it has been positioned somewhere in any lateral direction, or it is very much inferior. So we check that. We check the tone of the muscle by little palpation. We check for the pelvic lift by asking the person to contract the pelvic floor and see whether the pelvic is getting lifted in upward direction or no. We also try to observe the strength of the contraction. It's just an observation again. By asking the person to cuff, we check whether there is any sign of prolapse or whether there is any sign of prolapse or any organ which is kind of popping out when the patient is cuffing, or basically we ask them to do cuffing. And we do check for sensations using a Q-tip. So like any other sensory evaluation, we do the same. Now, internal pelvic exam is generally done with basically how we do at Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital is subjective and objective both. So subjectively, it's been done with the finger manual examination. So basically and objectively it is done with the biofeedback. I'll be coming to it later. So the internal pelvic exam is basically palpation of, first of all, external urogenital diaphragm. So after palpating the external area for tenderness and any kind of lump or anything, we have now entered into the internal area of the pelvic floor, where once we go in, first thing comes in the external urogenital diaphragm, the superficial pelvic floor muscle. So we check for tenderness, we check for any kind of tightness, any kind of taut bands, which is very commonly seen in such patients. In chronic pelvic pain, it is very common. It is very initially, but it's in my experience, it is very difficult to do internal pelvic exam in initial couple of sessions. You need to develop a good rapport, and also the patients do not relax because they have already come to you after consulting a lot of consultants, after doing all possible kind of CT, MRI, and everybody, ultimately somebody telling him or her, look, I can't do anything beyond this, you have to live with it. And then they come to us, and there is anxiety which is definitely coming into our way when it comes to dealing with such patients. They are highly anxious. They are also depressed that, look, nothing can happen with my life now. I have to live with this pain. I'm going to live like this only. To share with you, there are a couple of patients who shared their suicidal ideations also with me. So we need to really make a good rapport with them. So when it comes to inserting the finger and checking for the pelvic floor muscles inside, we need to first of all relax the patient a lot. So even if the patient, after developing rapport, for example, if the patient is not relaxing, diaphragmatic breathing exercise is something which is very important, and it relaxes the person beautifully. Also, I play soft music. So whenever there is a patient with pelvic floor coming for pelvic floor rehabilitation, music is a must. So soft, relaxing music, or somebody, if some patient preferences also taken care of. But yes, definitely for patients with chronic pelvic pain, soft, relaxing music also plays a lovely part. So we are evaluating these muscles for their tenderness and tightness. We should also evaluate them by asking them to contract the muscle and subsequently relax. So we check how strong is the contraction, how is the tone of the muscle, how the patient is relaxing, is the relaxation happening normally, or he is finding it difficult to relax. Difficulty in relaxing the pelvic floor muscle is something which is very common with such population. Same thing, we can also do vaginal or rectal exam. It's the same thing, which I'm coming again. In males, we do it mainly with the rectal examination, females vaginal examination. But very important and practical aspect is to take the consent. Consent is something which is very important, because definitely we are dealing with somebody's private part, and I generally keep one more person along with me, maybe patient's relative or one of my own colleague who can accompany me during the examination. So for the patient safety and for my safety as well. We check for tone, strength, conditioning, coordination. Coordination is basically how is the pelvic lift happening when contracting, and when while relaxing, how is the pelvic floor relaxing, and there is proper coordination of the muscle or no, and any other anatomic deficit such as prolapse or something which can be felt. Also, while doing these examination, we check for simultaneously contraction of the abdominals or glutei or adductors. For example, if the pelvic floor muscles are found to be very weak or so at times, because some part of the pelvic floor is tight and the other muscles are relatively weak. So to contract those weakened muscles, these accessory muscles take part, and we need to discourage such kind of contraction when it comes to treatment and training these patients. Now, like any other grading of the muscles, this is the Oxford grading is something which we look at, modified Oxford grading, sorry, which we look at for grading pelvic floor. But before that, we also check for endurance in terms of sustained isometric holds to evaluate endurance of the slow twitch muscle fibers and quick flicks for the fast twitch muscle fibers. And we see that how fast and how strong a contraction is, and how much is the patient able to sustain that hold. As I spoke about modified Oxford grading for MMT, starting from grade 0 with no discernible contraction, grade 1 being very weak contraction or flicker, grade 2 being weak contraction again, but it is also associated with little bit of increase in tension, but no lift or squeeze. Grade 3 moderate contraction with some degree of lift and squeeze. Grade 4 is good contraction producing elevation with some resistance, and grade 5 is strong contraction and strong resistance from the muscles. Okay. Now this is how we evaluate and we document the pelvic floor examinations. It's called as perfector method. So in perfector method, this is the first P stands for power, as we spoke about it in as per modified Oxford grading. E for endurance, again we spoke. So it's basically what we see is time in seconds during which patient can tighten pelvic floor before muscle strength is reduced by 50%. And it is usually around 10 seconds per contraction. R is for repetition. So number of pelvic floor muscle contractions patient can perform, allowing 4 seconds of rest in between each contraction. So to give you a normal ballpark, it's generally around 10. F stands for fast. So basically number of fast pelvic floor muscle contractions patient can perform, contracting the muscles as strongly as possible and relaxing them as quickly as possible. Elevation. So we need to also check during these contractions, is there a posterior pelvic lift during these contractions? Co-contraction, basically, do the lower abdominal muscles contract during pelvic floor? So lower abdominal muscles are considered those muscles which are just right above your pelvic floor. So there is definitely little bit of co-contraction of the pelvic lower abdominal muscles while the pelvic floor is contracting. T for timing, synchronous involuntary contraction of pelvic floor muscles on cuffing. This is the normal reflex which then Mother Nature has gifted us. So whenever we are cuffing, there is involuntary pelvic floor muscle contraction to avoid conditions like prolapse, also to support our organs and to maintain a proper intra-abdominal or intra-pelvic pressure to ultimately, finally, to protect the organs and the structures around. R stands for relax. That is to ability to relax between pelvic floor muscle contraction. And this is the method devised by Laycock and Jerwood in 2001, and this is still one of the very important and very easily done method, and it's documented very nicely. Now, the second part of evaluation, this we spoke about the manual evaluation. Second part of evaluation is using the EMG. Now, electromyography basically is done with the it's basically done to check the, I'll come to it, the basic resting muscle activity of the pelvic floor. It is basically done using the internal vaginal or rectal electrode or surface electrodes to evaluate accessory muscle activity and the pelvic floor muscle contraction at rest. So this is the electrode which you are seeing is for the electrical stimulation for checking the EMG. This is the intrarectal electrode. These are the surface electrodes. These are the different types of electrodes which we can use. There are also pressure sensors, but then I'll talk a little later about it. Electrode placement is, the surface electrodes are placed like this. So there are two electrodes, two assessing electrode and stimulating electrodes are placed just near to the perineum, and one reference electrode in the posterior thigh, or you can even put it in the sacral area. And the internal intravaginal electrode, this is an example of intravaginal electrode, is been internally, which we can see is placed somewhere like this. Now, we are blessed to have Myomed 632X machine. This is the machine by the company Endraf Nonius and provided to our. Thank Mr. Rajiv Talati and Mr. Deepak Shah for providing us this beautiful piece of equipment. So this is the machine which we use for EMG biofeedback, for assessment and treatment both. So these are the 4 phases of evaluation. First is the initial baseline phase, in which we see the resting electrical activity of the muscle. How is the muscle at rest? I will show you the electrical activity of both hypertonic and hypotonic muscles, and you will be able to appreciate it better with the diagram. Then we ask the person to rapidly contract, and we check for the waves. We check for the numbers which are been put, which are basically the microvolt, the type of the amount of contraction, the strength of the contraction which has been measured objectively. That is in the computer which we see. Tonic contraction phase, again for the endurance, and late baseline phases to check the relaxation of the muscle. Okay, I'll show. So now, for the therapeutic intervention in chronic pelvic pain, very importantly, it is the multidisciplinary team approach. It would be always great to involve your other team members, like a psychologist. I have a lovely team. I'll be showing the picture of my lovely team later. I have a psychologist in my team. We have a yoga therapist, and we have a dietitian, and of course the primary referring consultant. So we all together work as a team with the patient and the family. And trust me, this approach is always better, and it has really helped the patient a lot, rather than me as a physiotherapist can just dealing with the muscles, but definitely not doing with the patient's mind. What they need is some kind of asanas. They need somebody to talk about their problems, which is a lovely skill, a lovely skill having which a psychologist have. And definitely a dietary modification to assist in their defecation specifically. And yes, when it comes to training the muscles, yes, diet plays a major role. Patient education is something very, very, very important. Most of the pelvic floor chronic pain patients are not aware of their pelvic floor. So basically, awareness of the pelvic floor, the education, what is pelvic floor, what it is made up of, the muscles and bones and everything, whatever we study in the initial pages of anatomy books is to be taught to the patients, to be explained to the patient. Explanation of the entire treatment process, the evaluation process, and yes, the realistic goal setting is something which is very, very important. So we need to give them a realistic goals. We cannot tell them, okay, within a week you will be absolutely fine, hale and hearty. And if that doesn't happen, if it happens, superb. If it doesn't happen, then it again puts the patient into dark boom of the psychological issues, and they become very depressed, and they again start believing that, look, nothing can happen with me. So definitely setting up realistic goals like any other treatment is very important. So we need to educate about the awareness of pelvic floor, our treatment process in terms of neuromuscular re-education and proper activation and relaxation of pelvic floor. Mind you, friends, their pelvic floor is very tight. So what is their perception about pelvic floor is tight. They do not, or maybe they have forgotten how to relax the pelvic floor. So basically re-educating the muscle specifically for relaxation and activation, I would put it at a second level, second number in this scenario, is very important. And in this process, if the patient is not ready, not able to understand it well, we take help of our 632X Myomed machine, and it has given us lovely results. We need to also address the other musculoskeletal issues, how we found in the examination about the patients having trouble with the hip joints or sacroiliac joints, tenderness, trigger points in areas in and around pelvic floor. This has to be done with the help of internal, in the similar fashion of internal pelvic exam. We do also relaxation of the internal pelvic floor muscles with the help of techniques like myofascial release, stretching of the pelvic floor. At times when there are a lot of bands or something, we also, I've used a little bit of component of CD-axis technique. And basically, overall, it comes to relaxing the angry pelvic floor muscle. And yes, whenever there is a joint dysfunction in and around the area, we address that. There is strengthening and endurance training. But first, I would put it at endurance training. I'm contradicting my own writing, but it is first the endurance training and then comes as the strengthening. Definitely, once these muscles are relaxed, patients will tell us, madam, initially I was not able to pass urine. It was very difficult, but now I'm leaking. Why? Because the angry muscles are now relaxed, but they have over time, they have gone into weakness. They have forgotten their normal function, their usual function. So again, coming back to the re-education and then definitely strengthening, and we put the patients into home program. We also ask them to follow up with our yoga and psychological consults, and definitely the dietetics. And finally, there is a meeting with the family and the patient, and then with the entire team sits together, including the consultant, and we review. And multidisciplinary team approach has been found very, very beneficial compared to when this is my observation, that when I used to treat such patients all alone, come totally on me, I didn't really get much of early success. But multidisciplinary team approach is definitely, it will give success definitely, and also rather early, which always a patient would seek. So this is how a hypertonic muscle at rest would look in Myomed 632X. So this lining which you are seeing, it is a muscle at rest. So generally, resting muscle would be somewhere between 0 to not between 0 to 40, and would be like, in a very you will get a very nicely formed line. But in this, we are seeing that it's like really angry and not even at rest, it is not really in a synchronous fashion. And as you can see, 47.2 microvolt is the resting, it is a resting tone of the muscle, it is a resting pressure. So when it comes to down training, now I'm talking a little bit about the management with the help of this lovely modality. When it comes to down training, we have to put up a setting which says that stimulation should be below the threshold. We set up a threshold for a person to relax. So once a person starts relaxing, and they reach at the threshold lining, we give a pressure feedback, pressure biofeedback. I would not prefer electrical muscle stimulation in terms of biofeedback, because electrical stimulation will further stimulate the muscle and it can lead to further contraction of the muscle. It can aid the contraction, and I will not achieve my goal. So this is the time where I use pressure biofeedback, and the stimulation or the pressure is been given below the threshold once the patient reaches below the threshold level. So this is how the patient achieves a goal. Of course, this is like in between, like after 2 to 3 weeks of rigorous training. And this is how is like if we compare the previous linings, a previous graph, and now you see this graph. So this red dotted line is the threshold which I have set for him to relax. And previously he was somewhere in the 47 microvolt level. Now with the relaxation, he is achieving this level. And after 4 weeks at rest, this was the graph. So when we compare this and this, there is definitely a lot of difference. Of course, psychology, yoga, diet, everything has taken part into this. I would not take the entire credit on me. Now let's come to supportive dysfunctions, which we deal quite a lot with, which is prolapse, incontinence. I'll go a little bit on detail in incontinence. Basically, incontinence, basically the supportive dysfunctions are basically loss or decrease in the strength or integrity of connective tissue and muscles. Symptoms may show symptoms like bowel bladder incontinence or difficulties, falling out, feeling of pelvic floor, something coming out per vagina maybe, then organ prolapse, low back pain, pelvic and suprapubic pressure, like because the organs have now come down from their usual level, usual place, and now they are putting pressure into the unusual areas, and frequent urinary tract infections which we come across. So in this diagram, if we can see how a strong pelvic floor looks like, and a weak pelvic floor is become like a small, thin plate of the muscle. And here, if we can see, is a nice, strong, and a healthy pelvic floor. So this is how, and as we can see with this strong pelvic floor, our organs stand strong and straight. They are supported well. And over here, we can see the rectum, the bladder, the vagina, basically the uterus is definitely not supported well, and they have come down. And it's leading to saggy pelvic floor. Basically, causes are childbirth leading to injury, stretch weakness from delivery, episiotomy tears, effect of hormonal imbalances during pregnancy and menopause, obesity, very important, chronic cough, smoking, asthma, repetitive cough, chronic constipation, straining, hysterectomy, prostate surgery, pelvic fractures, and malignancies. So supportive dysfunctions are mainly organ prolapse in terms of cystocele, bladder prolapse, rectocele, rectal prolapse, uterocele, uterine prolapse, and incontinence, which is urinary and anal. So now in coordination dysfunctions, there is basically faulty tissue contractility and difficulty isolating pelvic floor muscle contraction and relaxation. I'll come to it a little bit in detail. And there is disused dysfunction. Now in incontinence, basically when we look at the number from India, which is latest recent numbers, just last month, in May 2020, it was found out that 10 to 67.9% incidences are of urinary incontinence in India. And most are underreported issue. Definitely, they say it's a topic of taboo. How would I say? Instead, let me use a diaper. I'm okay wearing a diaper. Nobody would come to it. Oh, what if? And they say it is so embarrassing to leak urine. Definitely, it is embarrassing to leak urine, but it is definitely not embarrassing to speak about it. Speak to your healthcare professionals. So speak to somebody whom you can trust, whom you can rely on, and then definitely there is a problem. There is a solution to this problem. And as per the reports, only 10% of the population seek medical intervention, and more than 200 million people worldwide live with incontinence. So imagine, this is this is from the data in Lancet 2004. It's been like 16 years. Definitely, it would have definitely at least become from 200, it would have been 300 million so far. Risk factors, as I spoke before, types of urinary incontinence are stress, urge, overflow, and functional incontinence. Stress urinary incontinence is basically caused by an increase in intra-abdominal pressure or with exertion, Valsalva maneuver, often related to weakening of pelvic floor muscles, which allows leakage at the moments of stress. Now, these movements could be coughing, sneezing, laughing, straining, lifting, exercising, bending, jumping, and the person would lose a small amount of urine during these events when there is increased intra-abdominal pressure. So this is what is a person with normal pelvic floor whose bladder is able to withstand the pressures, and this is what happens with the patient with weak pelvic floor, whenever there is pressure, person leaks the urine. Let's come to urge incontinence. It's an involuntary bladder contraction creating an uncontrolled loss of urine, and it can vary from a small amount, a few drops, to complete emptying of the bladder. Signs are urine loss on the way to the bathroom, strong urge to urinate, and frequent urination more than 8 times per day, waking frequently at night to urinate. And the triggers are environmental factors such as sound of running water or cold weather, key in the lock, or garage door syndrome. This is all we have read in the Sapsford. Overflow incontinence. Bladder pressure is greater than the urethral pressure, especially at very high bladder volume, and usually caused by an obstruction in the urethra. So the signs are, this is for the overflow incontinence: bladder distension, reduced urine flow, dribbling of urine, altered flow of the urine stream, straining, and frequent urination more than 8 per day. Functional is basically basically cause of factors outside the urinary tract contributing to this condition. People with insufficient mobility or impaired manual dexterity. Basically, this is seen very commonly in elderly population and patients with dementia. Coming a little bit to fecal incontinence, since it is, I would rather put it as it is as common as urinary incontinence. And we as pelvic floor physical therapists, we can definitely help such population. And these patients will have involuntary leakage of stools from the anus, may be accompanied by other bowel problems such as diarrhea, constipation, gas, and bloating. Following could be the causes: muscle damage, nerve damage. This I'm talking in terms of the anus. Constipation, diarrhea, when they try to strain quite a lot to pass stool. Hemorrhoids, loss of rectal storage capacity, surgery, rectal prolapse, and rectocele. Assessment is again the same like previous, the external examination, and internal pelvic examination. So first comes is the thorough history, systemic review of the other systems, external exam of pelvic floor like we discussed before, internal exam again the same way, perfector method, and muscle grading as per modified Oxford grading. Now, these are the few contraindications to internal pelvic examination in terms of pregnancy, active infection of bladder, vagina, or rectum, or even uterus for that matter. Up to 6 weeks postpartum, up to 6 weeks post vaginal or rectal surgery. Females less than 18-year-olds, basically females who are unmarried. Person who's given negative consent. There are many patients who say, no, I don't want to have an internal pelvic examination. So then we have to manage with the external pelvic examination, and just like with our experience and observation, we have to plan out the treatment program. It also happens eventually that once they develop good rapport with you, they say, look, I'm okay if you do my internal exam, I'm fine. Okay, and then also there are some patients who do not have cognitive understanding of the procedure, those who have got low intelligence quotient. So, and somebody who's not having enough mental stability it's a contraindication to do internal pelvic exam. Coming to the bladder diary, in bladder diary is basically a very good part of evaluation, and it is something which helps us quite a lot into managing and planning the treatment program for these patients. So bladder diary is something which is seen on the screen. It has been asked, it has been the patients with incontinence or maybe any kind of urinary trouble are being asked to maintain a bladder diary, and we evaluate this bladder diary in the initial phases. Patient is asked to do it for consecutive 3 days in the initial phase. So once the patient comes to us after doing all the examination, we ask the person to maintain the bladder diary for 3 days. We check and then we plan out the program. Then again in between we ask the person to do it in the same way to check at what path are we, whether we're going on the correct path or we need to have any kind of changes in the system when in the treatment. And ultimately it is towards the end of the treatment to check the pre and post changes. So basically bladder diary is something which is a record of your entire fluid intake and urine output. The person is asked to keep a time check for every half an hour or every 1 hour. So it's generally it is 1 hour is something which is very feasible. So like say for example, this person at 7:30 a.m. had orange juice or coffee amount of and coffee. So you write down the amount of intake and you measure the urine output. You check how urgent it was when the person went to pass urine. We check how urgent was it. One is the least urgent, one was kind of okay, no problem, I could manage, and third is the most urgent. Activity during at what time? At that time, what activity was the person doing before he or she had this sensation? And leakage, whether he or she had while wearing a diaper or undergarments are being damp, wet or soaked, something like that. So ultimately at the total, we do the total cumulative total, and we get the numbers, and there are definitely we keep the repeat follow-ups. Now let's look at the hypotonic muscle at rest. So we saw the hypertonic muscle where the graph was somewhere in this region. This is the hypotonic muscle at rest seen in our 632X Myomed 632X machine. And we can see the voltage is 2.6 microvolt. And there it was 47.2. Here the treatment lies in stimulating above the threshold. So we set the threshold and the person has to contract, and person is able to see the computer screen, of course. Person has to attain the contraction in such a way that he or she reaches that above the threshold level, and then electrical stimulation is being delivered. Here I would use electrical stimulation also because I want to strengthen the pelvic floor muscles. So these are the different currents which are being offered in the machine which we have: Russian, biphasic, TENS, Faraday. As per the guidelines and as per the literature, biphasic pulse TENS is something which is relatively tolerable in that very super sensitive area, and patients are able to take it in a relatively easy way. Faraday can also be done if the patient is able to tolerate the current. So in this picture which we are seeing, this diagram, this line is patient's contraction. So you can see patient is really struggling to get up to the level of threshold, and once the person is able to reach, the color changes from gray to pink, and the person is receiving the electrical stimulation set by us. And this is how simultaneous strengthening is also happening. So ultimately at the end, we get a graphical presentation of all our contractions. So, and we get the value also. So overall, this was the biofeedback and machine, the objective evaluation of your pelvic floor muscles, and also the management. So the management would lie into definitely rehabilitating your pelvic floor in terms of strengthening and endurance. Now, how many contractions a day am I supposed to tell my patients? So basically, for strengthening, we ask the person to squeeze, feel the pressure in generating inside the pelvic floor and release. Squeeze, feel the pressure and release. Likewise, 5 sets during the day. They say 50 to 100, literature has said 50 to 100 contractions a day is enough to strengthen a weakened pelvic floor. I generally tell my patients to make it 200 because I know that they do not really reach up till 100. They do not even land up doing 30 to 50 also. So definitely patient selection is important to tell them, because if somebody is very sincere, and yes, if they take you very seriously and they land up doing 200 contractions a day, the pelvic floor will get fatigued and they will end up having more incontinence, and they will end up coming crying to you that, look, you told me to do exercises but it worsened. So patient selection is very important in this. You definitely come to know that, okay, now I can this person is intelligent, will understand and will comply to the treatment. So you tell them the exact numbers. And for this we spoke about strengthening. For endurance, we, like any other endurance, we ask them to we ask them to contract and hold for a count of 5 to start with. Then you go on to increasing 7, 10, and we can then ask them to keep it for a little longer time. Now these exercises are being done in different positions. To start with, it is done in the gravity eliminated position, which is supine with hip knee bent, or you can also call it as a little bit of a kind of lithotomy position, wherein the rest of the other muscles are relaxed with hip and knee bent. The progression can be done by challenging the muscles with the help of gravity, in sitting, in standing, while doing certain activities like walking. This is a further challenging activity. Bladder training is something which is important, which we have been also writing in our answer sheets and books. But yes, bladder training has been done with the help of following points. Basically, you ask the person to drink at least 6 cups or glasses of water a day. These patients land up drinking less water, thinking, oh, I will if more the water, more the urine will be formed. So they do not, to avoid accidents, they do not have water properly. So drinking too little of water can lead to constipation, and again a new problem. A full bladder is actually needed to activate a normal voiding reflex. Fluid restriction will cause urine to become more concentrated and more irritating to the bladder to hold that concentrated urine. So again, not a good thing. Ask them to keep drinking water, being minimum to 6, and regulate the amount of timing of fluid and its intake. Now, we need to also tell them to avoid bladder irritants. Like there are certain foods and drink, which like alcoholic beverages, caffeine, including chocolate, acidic fruits and juices, tomatoes. We ask them to avoid milk products, spicy foods, and artificial sweeteners. So this is something which is very important, which we tell our patients. Scheduled toileting, I'll be talking a little bit in detail about it later. Lifestyle modifications also I'm going to talk a little later. Medical management, and we need to avoid bladder irritants, as I spoke before. Management is basically, as I spoke about, pelvic floor training exercises, biofeedback and electrical stimulation, vaginal weights and cones. So in the diagram, which over here we can see there are vaginal weights and cones. It is also a form of biofeedback, and they act by contracting the pelvic floor to prevent the cone from slipping out. It can be used in a standing position and also while cuffing or walking. But definitely for no longer than 15 to 20 minutes. As longer you can produce pain, decreased blood flow, and also decreased oxygen consumption. Also, the cone weight generally varies from 25 gram to 75 gram. It will assist in the activation of type 1 and type 2 fibers. Both the fibers are activated It will improve the proprioception and muscle strength, and very much useful in training the patient to eliminate the Valsalva maneuver. Because if Valsalva occurs, the cone falls out. So one needs to keep contracting the pelvic floor when the cone is in. After 8 weeks of rehabilitation of these patients, so when we look at the previous slide wherein the pelvic floor muscle was at rest, was at this level, it now came up to this level. So this is the resting activity. Now in behavioral modifications, there is of course lifestyle modification in terms of doing regular exercises. Definitely avoid high impact exercises like jumping or skipping ropes, and all these things you avoid. A simple walking aerobic exercise would do. Adapt these patients generally adapt to just in case behaviors. Or let me keep a packet of diaper. What if or just in case I leak, let me wear a diaper. But what if I leak? So this is what is happening. Now we need to teach them scheduled toileting to in terms of scheduling their toilet visits to help increase the length of time between the voids. So during bladder retraining, the individual would learn his or her bladder limits and when to urinate at the right time to avoid an accident. So over a period of time, they understand that, okay, now my bladder is getting full. I need to go to the washroom, and they literally time it up. So there is definitely avoidance of an accident. There is learned relaxation with sudden urgency to void. So we need to teach them relaxation to avoid the anxiety associated with that feeling, oh, I'm just about to pass urine, but I'm not able to because there is no toilet around. So we need to make them understand that this can happen and you need to relax. Along with this relaxation, there is also there is effect on the pelvic floor, and you can avoid the accidental leakage. You can ask them to use absorbent products, but we need to tell them exactly what they're supposed to use. I would like to share an example with you. I had a patient who came to me after a geriatric person who came to me after prostate surgery for urinary incontinence. And we started with the treatment. One fine day, he met me in the medical store. He was buying a sanitary pad. I asked him, since I knew that in his family there are only two people, himself and his son, there is no female. So I was wondering that why is he buying a sanitary pad? Now, after a lot of courage and guts, I asked him, Uncle, why are you buying sanitary pad? He asked me, because I leak urine. I said, but sanitary pads are meant for something else. He said, diapers are expensive and sanitary pads are cheaper than that. So I am using sanitary pads. So I'm sure you guys must have got surprised. I'm sure. So this is the level of understanding and this is the level of literacy which common public has. And poor gentleman didn't even know that this is a female product, and he was just using it because it absorbs, but what it absorbs, that he didn't know. And also he didn't know that this is definitely not going to help him with this condition. So when we are prescribing any kind of absorbent products, we have to be very careful that what we are prescribing. Bladder diarrhea, as I spoke about before, psychological issues which I spoke in, hypertonous pelvic floor, hypotonic pelvic floor patients also would need psychological support, because yes, it's a lot of embarrassment to leak in public. I'm probably homebound because I leak, my clothes stink, when I laugh or when I strain, I leak stools. It is really embarrassing. What will this person say? These are the questions that the patients ask. And definitely it creates a very negative psychological impact. So a psychologist help is very important. Diet to definitely regulate your stool consistency, your urine, and general well-being. Like I said, that one needs to be ready for the major change in their routine lifestyle, and definitely changing is definitely not an easy task. So we need to encourage them for this. So this is my team where we work together. Individually, we are one drop, but together we are an ocean. This is myself. This is Nityatara Raina, our yoga therapist and a psychological counselor. She is Forum Malde, a dietitian, and she is Mezabine Dordi. She is a clinical psychologist. So whenever I find trouble, I catch hold of these two girls, Nityatara and Mezabine, and then yes, definitely then the forum enters, and we work together as a lovely team. And yes, we have seen multiple cases with a lot of success. Thank you very much. This is my institute where I work, Sir H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital. Thank you very much. I'm open for questions.
Bijal, you can just go to Q&A section and there are questions, or you can just go through it, and the questions that, appropriate, you can answer those questions.
Okay. So, 1 second. Well, by mistakenly, Parul Chauhan has written to ask a question to Mayank. Mayank, you got to answer this. Parul has asked, is it common to have increased urinary output along with increased urinary frequency in overactive bladder? Yes, it is common. It can happen. It can happen. Urinary overactive bladder is also associated with overflow incontinence. So yes, it can also happen. Yes. And Abhishek has asked a question about how we manage urinary incontinence after C-section. We have to wait for 6 weeks for the sutures to heal, and thumbs up from the gynecologist. And yes, we can definitely start with the rehab. Menstrual cramps falling into pain dysfunction. Yes, it can happen. Yes. Okay, there's somebody who's asked how the habitual postural dysfunctions cause chronic pelvic pain. Like, is it related to lumbar posture, as in prolonged sitting only? No, it is not only with prolonged sitting, but yes, the kind of clients which I have seen, they are of a very high and high profile jobs who involve a lot of sitting, and they are mainly type A personality, and somebody who's driving at very high end jobs and who's like driving from one place to another, and mostly in sitting position. So throughout the day they are into sitting position. So yes, it is associated, but then sitting is not the only position to be blamed for this. Biofeedback, yes, I spoke about biofeedback happening in down training. Yes. With vaginal floor stimulation with the vaginal electrode, is it possible to burn the internal muscles, as sometimes the patient can't feel the currents? So, burning the internal muscles is something which I haven't seen in my practice. At the same time, when the patient is undergoing electrical stimulation, first of all, I would not put a patient under electrical stimulation if he or she is not able to understand or feel the currents. That's one thing. Another thing is, when the patient is undergoing pelvic floor stimulation, I would not leave the patient and go away. So it is completely up to us. One is patient selection, and second is about you have to be always around and you have to keep supervising.
Dr. Bijal, I just want to add one more point against this question. If you're using a neuromuscular electrical stimulation, NMES, which is in biphasic current, so the chances of burns are almost negligible.
Right.
You may not get the contraction, but chances of burns are, because it is not in galvanic current, it is an alternating current with a very short duration pulses. So I think there should not be any problem. But yes, as you said correctly, it needs to be an attended treatment.
Right. So that's one thing. Another thing, there is another question which is there. Many people have asked me, how is the threshold decided for muscle relaxation or contraction? So basically, it completely and highly depends upon the resting electrical activity of the muscle. As we saw in our slides, that in the resting electrical activity of the hypotonic muscle was somewhere very much near to the baseline, and the hypertonic was very much above the baseline. So for a hypertonic muscle, to set a threshold, I would put it under the resting electrical activity. And for hypotonic, I would put it above the resting electrical activity, depending upon the kind of contraction and the strength of contraction is the patient able to generate. I hope I answered your questions. Well, there are many questions. I've already elaborated on functional incontinence. Menstruation is definitely a contraindication for pelvic floor muscle examination, but you can definitely make them do pelvic floor muscle exercises provided they are comfortable and they do not have, we do not land up exaggerating their uterine cramps. Okay, I think we should end this session.
Thank you, Dr. Bijal. And I think it was a very, very informative and very useful webinar to most of the audience. And there was amazing response from participants. And we thank you all for participating. We will be sending you to the participant. We will be sharing you the link where you can, if you missed onto the webinar some part, or if you want to see it again, we will be sending it to a link where you can, see it whenever it is convenient to you. So once again, thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you for
Bijal.
attending.
Thank you, Rajiv.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mayank Thakkar, for being part of this webinar and arranging this webinar. My special thank to Dr. Mayank Thakkar.
Yes,
Thank you
great
very
thanks to
much.
him. Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank
We're
you.
signing
Thank
off.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thanks.
Thanks.